Stand by, stand by.
Welcome to another Church Around the Corner 2.0 chat. My name is Eric, and you are?
I'm Mark.
Great.
And what's up this time?
Well, last time we decided it'd probably be good to do a thumbnail sketch of who we are and give some of that quick history. I can go first.
Yeah,
and I'll give you some time to make some stuff up. My education, I took a kinesiology degree, and I took a master's in Christian studies from Regent College, and I have another degree that I probably never finished in ancient medieval history.
Wow.
And I like the idea of Christian movements and Christian leadership. Vocationally, I've worked for the last 20 years in church and parachurch roles, and the things that I've come to value are things that are relationally based with a commitment to be involved incarnationally in the lives of people around us and community, and then also involved in mission, the idea of purpose and being a change agent in the world. So that's me briefly, and you.
Okay, me. Well, so I say I haven't had so much as careers, but what I call careens. First off, I have a graduate degree in computer science, so I worked for about a dozen years at the University of British Columbia on staff doing computer networking stuff. Then I have what I call my downwardly mobile careen, where I went on church staff for 10 years, finished up a Master of Divinity, again at Regent College, and became ordained, etc., etc. Another careen involved about 8 years working as a remote software developer for Silicon Valley companies. I've had a couple of stints as a transitional minister, worked as a chaplain, a spiritual care coordinator at the acute care hospital close by, and I also have this tiny little software company on the side, just two of us, and my partner might actually be walking in the door as we speak.
All right.
There we are.
Great. Well, it sounds interesting. Careens, I like that.
Careens.
And ordained. Reverend Fox.
Yeah, if I had a ring, I'd ask you to kiss it.
Oh, that's very nice. That's great. And so one of our value statements, and we're going to go over our value statements, is that we value relationships and community. And we talked briefly about house churches. And so can you describe relationships and community a bit more?
Yeah, okay. The basic idea of Church Around the Corner 2.0 is about the primary church experience. What actually is that? And of course, we have an upside down church sculpture picture on our blog on that value statement. But that's what we're mainly interested in. Zero in what is the primary church experience and make structure around that. So the idea is, if you value relationships and community, it has to happen in a relatively small amount of people, say 10 to 20 people max. They meet wherever, where they're comfortable, an apartment, a house, a pub, a restaurant. And that's shared life happens in those groups. They meet ideally, say, twice a month to learn together by applying the Bible to their lives, eating together, worshiping together, and supporting one another in prayer and action. And so that shared life experience is what we are calling house church.
And I think that's helpful. Thank you. And I think you bring up a good point about the idea that your structure needs to match with what your values are. Absolutely. So if you say you value relationships, community, Sabbath, whatever it is, but your structure doesn't reinforce it or help it, it can be disenfranchising, frustrating, and have people disconnect from what they think a Christian community can be. So now, I think it's fair to ask, do you even know what you're talking about, Mark?
Well, some of the time, not all of the time. But in this case, I mentioned my church careen. Towards the end of that time, my wife and I were wrestling along with other people. What actually is this thing called church, right? It's what is the primary church experience? And so we began an experiment that's begun for about a dozen years, or more than that, actually. So we actually have lived it. So there's a bit of know what you're talking about, but it's not a new idea. I mean, the early church began in house churches, and we're told that the primary church experience for many people, many Christians around the world, is in a house church. Right.
Okay, great. And you know what, let's be practical for a moment. I had someone ask me a question, well, what about families with lots of children? How do you structure around that?
Exactly.
Can you comment?
And I think the first thing you need to say is there's no one size fits all. You're not trying to say this is actually how you have to do it. But I think the starting point, the starting value here is that we always want to consider our children as first-class spiritual beings. And often we don't do that. We sort of say, well, when you get to a certain age and maybe you've done a few things, then you have some validity. No, they get stuff far more intuitively than adults often do. Yeah.
Now, Mark, you have a great story.
Yeah,
you mind sharing that very briefly?
Yeah. Well, just we were together, and the kids. There was, and we were doing stuff, reading scripture. One of the kids was reading the scripture, and at the stage where you put the finger under the letter, right? So, and we were doing something on spiritual gifts, right? And he was reading in 1 Corinthians 12, where Paul is doing this analogy of the church as a body, and he was reading, if the whole body were an eye, and then he started to chuckle, and then he laughed because he had actually got that crazy picture, right? That we need each other. Adults, we hide behind words like mutuality, complementarity, stuff like that. He got the picture that if we're not all involved, it's crazy. It's like one giant big eyeball. That to me was doing house church was worth it for that.
Yeah. Great.
Anyway, back to your question about kids. Very practically, you might decide stage in life, we're just going to get a babysitter, and our kids just don't work at this point. All the way to saying, we'll be all together, but we'll arrange childcare or babysitting for the children at certain points in our house church gathering. Like, for example, in our experience, often it was kids would have prayer requests, but they weren't interested in praying together, so they would go off and do other things. All the way to where you actually say, we're not going to exclude them from anything. We're going to include them in everything we do. So I think the key idea is experiment with what works for that particular group.
Great. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
And just these things, we'll mention the details about. There are books and resources if you're curious about the idea of house church. I'll put them up on our blog. Right?
Yeah.
Anyway.
And now it's good to clarify. I think we use the word house church, but it's good to remember that we also meet. Come together, all the house churches, for a bigger celebration.
Yeah.
So it's not just limited to just those groups.
Yeah, there's that sort of rhythm, right? Twice a month, maybe meeting in the small, once a month meeting in the large, that kind of thing.
Okay, so now you and I live in Vancouver, busy place, and so how on earth could we fit another thing in?
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Like when we're talking about Church Around the Corner 2.0, we're not talking about adding something in. We're talking about subtracting things from our lives. And one of our values, as you've seen, is the value of Sabbath, which literally means stop, do nothing. So our structure, our value is nothing much, churchy-wise, happens on Sunday. It's a chance to sleep in, to hang out, make space for God to renew you individually or in your family grouping or whatever. Because this is another value, though. In spiritual life, often less is more. Yeah.
And that is a good segue because now we're about to do less of this.
Yes, so, exactly.
Thank you,
Reference the Blogspot.
And churcharoundthecorner.blogspot.ca to continue the conversation.
All right.